Hey guys, for this video I'm gonna be looking at some of my games I played at the 1Ks against Dreamka with my buddy Derek, and there's a couple interesting spots in here. So the first hand's a pretty standard flop bet. Then I think on the turn it's pretty close because I think my hand is still pretty good here because I think he's check raising a lot of queen X on this flop. And considering that like a lot of his flop check call range contains floats of like backdoor equity, like backdoor draws like 10-9, backdoor clubs, I think this turn really connects with a lot of those floats. So I think my hand gets value with the bet, and at the same time I protect my equity because if I check this turn, there is potentially a lot of bad rivers for me. But at the same time, it's a pretty close value bet because we're not that far ahead of his calling range. And also I want some hands in my flop bet range and then turn check range, because if I don't have any value hands in that range, I'm going to be betting the flop, and then whenever I check the turn I'm going to be folding the river too much to probes. So this hand would also be good to put in that range. So I think we should take a mixed strategy with that. Considering my hand strength and the range I'm trying to get value from, it's a pretty thin value bet, so I'm not going super big with my sizing here. I think like a 50 size does it. So King 6 here is a pretty standard jam on the limp there most of the time, but I'm going to be ignoring pre-flop for the most part in this video because I just use standard GTO ranges.
So Alex, what would your check raise range be on this 7-5-4 board?
Um, I think that's actually a pretty interesting spot to talk about because this board I think plays really different in a min-raise pot than if you compare it to a limp pot. Because in a limp pot, I think this would be a pretty good hand to check raise, because if you consider the options there, like check calling, we're going to have to face a turn barrel on a lot of turns. So our hand doesn't play that well to check call, but it's not a bad hand to check raise because we have a lot of equity with the open ender and the backdoor diamonds, and we block some of his strong value range, like a 7-6 or an 8-6. And at the same time, like if we start to check call too many draws, like we just check call or 8x or 6x, our check call range is gonna be too weak. It's gonna be too many unpaired hands, and it's going to be easy for him to barrel really wide against that range. So I think this in a limp pot would be a good hand to put in the check raise range. I have a solution here to show, like this is the entire check raise range in a limp pot. So we're check raising a lot of 6x here and a lot of 8x. So playing draws pretty aggressively. And I think in a min-raise pot, if you take the same strategy, what's going to happen is if you check raise his hand and he has something like a strong 7x or like pocket nines or like king 7, he's going to jam over my raise, and I'm going to have to fold a lot of equity or get it in with too weak a hand. So I don't want to do that. So because in a min-raise pot the stack to pot ratio is much shallower, so he's going to stack off much lighter on the flop. Whereas in a limp pot he's just going to flat most of those hands against the check raise. So considering that, I think my strategy in the min-raise pot should be a little bit different, and I think I should just check call this hand. So in a min-raise pot we actually play like this. So we're just check jamming some of our strongest draws and just check calling these. And 8x we play much more passive, or just fold a lot of it, which makes sense because we're up against a much stronger range in the min-raise pot.
Right, that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Then on the turn when he checks back, I think my hand should definitely be a lead for obvious reasons. I think the sizing is kind of interesting here because if I think about the check back range in a min-raise pot, it's a lot of high card hands on this type of board. A little bit of 5x, some 4x. So against that range, like, I mean, most of that range is high card hands. So I think I want to use a sizing that lets me include a lot of bluffs because I have a lot of 6x, 8x in my range that I want to be bluffing with. And at the same time protects the equity of my value range, like my 7x. So I think a big sizing is good, which is why I choose a pot size bet here.
So would you ever like overbet it or like 2x pot or?
Yeah, I think that would actually be better on a lot of other turns. Like say this turn is a 10, I think that's a good strategy. But the problem with the 4 is that we're potentially betting in 4x into 4x because he has some 4x in his flop check back range. So considering that, like our value range is like really linear here. Like we have some straights, we have some trips, and some top pairs we all want to get value with. So when our range is like linear like that, like we don't want to be using an overbet size. Because if you think about it, like with our 7x, we don't want to be betting too big into 4x. Like we would be overplaying our hand if we went that big. But if the turn is another card, like a 10x, I think we can do that.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So I actually think the top right board is also interesting to talk about, the 8-7-2. I think a lot of people play their top pairs a little bit too passive on this type of board. Like check raising only the good 8x that they're willing to stack off with. And I think if you think about 8x on this board, so say you have a hand like 8-9 or a 10-8, I think those hands are also good to check raise because if you just check call that hand on this flop, there's going to be a lot of turns that aren't the greatest runouts for you. Like there's a lot of overcards that can hit and your hand is quite vulnerable. Like if you compare it to like a king 7-2 flop, like there you don't have to check raise so much top pair because your top pair is not so vulnerable. But on this type of board, or even like a lower board, like if it's like 7-6-2, like I think you should start check raising more top pairs because the check call value of your top pair goes down. And if you check raise, you get value and you get to protect your equity. And also you don't have to stack off every hand you check raise with. Like you can check raise weak pairs on certain boards and then fold if the other guy re-raises.
Right,
Like
that's really smart. Yeah.
yeah, like if it's like a 8-7-4 or something, like you could check raise like an 8-2 off and then fold to a re-raise.
So A3 maybe without a backdoor flush draw in this type of spot would be pretty good to like if you check raise and then he like jams over, just easy let go.
Right, yeah. Yeah, just like the more vulnerable your top pair is, like I think the more you should consider check raising it because the value of check calling goes down. So it's always about comparing the two options you can take with your hand. And then on the river, I think that's also a little bit like I was thinking if he bets this river, what my calling range would be. And I would actually call this hand to a river bet because it's really high up in my range if you think about it. Like on this type of turn, I'm definitely betting out most my 8x because that's top pair on the turn. But I'm also betting most my 9x because those are an open-ender and that is going to consist like, it's going to be a large part of my bluffing range there. So if you think about my range on the river, it's really not that strong. Like I'm also betting a lot of 10x and 5x on the turn. So this hand is actually pretty high up in my checking range to him here. And with the king X, we also block some of his showdown value, part of his range. Like if he's checking back king high, he has showdown value and he won't bluff into me. So we're not blocking any bluffs with this hand. So that makes it a pretty decent candidate to check call a bet here.
Right, that makes a lot of sense because when you think about it, you're like, oh, bottom pair, I probably shouldn't call that. But when you actually really think about it, you actually don't have that much else to call with by this point in the hand.
Right, exactly, yeah. And your kicker is also important. Like with the king, you're not blocking any of his bluffs, so it's more likely he has a bluff then.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
All right, so limp pot bottom left at 15 BB. I think this is also quite interesting because like this board starts to play different with shallower stacks. Like if this is at 25 BB or deeper, I think ranges are quite different. Like he's going to be c-betting less top pairs on this board because at this depth at 15 BB we're jamming a lot of king x on him pre-flop. Like all our strong king x were like jamming or isoing. So we have a lot less top pair on this board. So he's going to be betting more of his top pairs here. Um, he's just like much stronger overall on this board. But then on this turn, I think with this type of turn, with deeper stacks, his barreling range is going to be really, or should be really polar. Like he should not be betting weak king x on this turn. He should be betting a pretty strong range consisting of like, I would say king 9 plus, two pairs and bluffs, and then be using an overbet size there for that range. Because if he starts betting too much king x on that turn, his bet and then check range becomes too weak, so we can exploit him in that part. So if he used a more polar range on that turn, he gets to bet a lot of hands, and then he gets to have more king x when he bets and then checks the turn in his range. But the thing is, with these shallow stacks, he can't really do that with this stack to pot ratio, because like if he bets 180 there, it's going to be awkward stack sizes on the river. So considering that, he should stop using that strategy at this stack depth and go for a more linear value range. So like at 25 BB, I would always fold this to like a really big double barrel, but at 15 BB, given that his value range is going to be more linear there, and he's also going to be betting more overall on this turn because we're much weaker here than deeper. So I think then this hand becomes a call because we don't have so much king x in our range anymore.
That's a very smart way of thinking of it.
Alright, so top left, I think with this type of value hand it's worth going much bigger on this flop, just for max value. And I would definitely use some bluffs to balance that with. And here on the turn I make a pretty big mistake. I was, I guess, afraid of getting check raised, but I checked back the turn here, and like that should really be a bet because this is a really good hand and we should be trying to get value with this hand.
So the double barrel range is probably like ace x plus a gut shot, ace like 7-8,
Yeah,
ace
exactly.
ace 8, ace 7, right? And then maybe you could check back hands like ace king, ace queen. Like if you're gonna check back like a hand like an ace x without the gut shot would be a better candidate.
That would for sure be a better candidate, but I might actually still bet those because if I think about type of range he's going to check raise here, like I thought in game that like this turn improves a lot of his range, like a lot of straights get there, and a lot of two pairs get there. So I was a little bit scared of getting check raised there. But if you think about his two pairs here, like he's not going to check jam 7-6 or 8-6 on me. Like that would be overplaying his hand, I think. So I think he would just check call those hands. So given that, I think you can bet quite a bit of 8x still because there's a lot of value in betting there. And like especially with an ace 10, like you're blocking some of his straights and you have even more equity. So that should for sure be a bet. And this here on the top right, I think I should like just call his flop 3-bet, right? What do you think?
Yeah, probably the majority of the range should just be a complete flatting range at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I really jam over this with too many hands there. So yeah, with the 3-7 here on the jack turn, jack's a pretty good turn for us on these type of boards because if you think about the type of range he c-bets and checks back on his flop, like on these low boards, I think he's going to be checking back more king highs and ace highs on this board, and he's probably c-betting a lot of his jack highs. So when he checks back, I think there's not as many jack highs in his range as in our range. So like we hit a lot more top pair on that turn. And at the same time he checked back the flop, so all of his strong flop range is out of his range as well, while we still have that in our range. So given that, our value range is really wide compared to his, and thus we can include a lot of bluffs. So I like an overbet here with that range, because I can include the maximum number of bluffs in that, and I get the most value with my hands. But I would use several different sizes. Like I'm not over betting a 6 here because I could still potentially be betting into a jack, and I'm trying to get value from hands worse than a 6, like a 4x or a 2x or a high card, and I don't think an overbet will be the optimal size to do that with. So I would use a few different sizings on this turn, like maybe use a half pot bet with the 4x and 6x, and then go full pot or overbet with the jack x or stronger. So bottom left, I think that's a pretty standard double barrel with pre-flop ranges at this point. You know, we're so shallow that I can easily value bet queen 3 again here. But I think top right is actually a more interesting spot because he check calls the flop, and like this is a really good flop for me. I'm going to be betting this with most of my air and definitely going to be barreling a lot. And then on this turn, he makes a really interesting play. He dunks into me.
Is that a good play to be donking this board that often?
Yeah, so like it's not something I was doing, and I looked it up, and it's actually really good. Like I have the solution here. He should be donking, yeah, more than 50% here. And what was a little bit surprising, but it makes sense, is that he's donking so much king x. But if you think about it, that's because on this flop, we're betting all our queen x, we're betting a lot of 10x, and there's a lot of draws on this board. So if you think about his king x, like there's actually a lot of value for him to be gotten there with the bet. Like we're going to be calling queen x, 10x, and a lot of draws there. So like, but at the same time, like his equity check calling that hand is not so good because it's not that good a bluff catcher. So I think that's why it likes doing that. And I guess it also wants to do that with jack x, and then 10x are its bluffs. And I think we don't want to raise here with a flush draw, because like if we raise here with our flush draw, what could potentially happen is that he jams it in with his jack x, because he would, to protect his equity because there's so many draws out there. So then we would like, yeah, again, have to fold or get it in way too light on this turn. So I think we want to just call that bet here with a flush draw. And the river I thought was pretty interesting because from a GTO point of view, I should definitely bluff this hand because it's bottom of my range and I'm not blocking any of his folding range. But in game I thought that, yeah, his donking range basically is some jack x, some king x, and some flush draws, though I think he would just like bet the flush draws. I think he has king x or jack x here. And I felt like a player wasn't folding trips in this spot. But having looked up the solution to this spot, it's always a jam, and that makes sense from a GTO point of view.
So are you not c-betting the 10-2 there?
I think that's pretty close. Um, I think I would check some 2x on that flop because he can check raise some of his strongest 3x and some of his better draws. So I don't want to get raised with this hand. Um, but yeah, it would also not be a bad bet because you get some value and like your hand is really vulnerable. Like there's a lot of hands in his range that would just fall to a bet that now get free equity to your hand. And if I think about it, yeah, like maybe I would like this check more if it was deeper because like with deeper stacks he's gonna have more ace-x in his range. Like he has virtually no ace-x in his range with these stack depths. So I think his check raise range on that flop is not gonna be that wide. So I think I could just c-bet this hand. What do you think?
Yeah, I think either c-betting or checking is probably a pretty good option there.
Yeah, it's super close anyways. But on the turn when he checks again, I think my hand's for sure a value bet.
I think a lot of players are too passive on the flop with their check raises, but I think he would not fall in that category. I think he would probably be pretty aggressive with his check raises.
Yeah, he probably played pretty perfect range. So when he check calls there on the turn, like I'm super confident that my hand is still good. Like I think he's leading most his pairs on that turn because he wants to protect equity and get value with those. So I think his range is mostly king highs, maybe some queen highs even, and yeah, I think my hand's still worth
Weaker
the bet
two
with this
X's.
range. Yeah. What do you think about my sizing? Maybe I should just go a bigger sizing there, right?
Yeah, we should probably be betting like 70, 80, 90, right?
Yeah, I mean my hand's pretty good, so
Plus, I don't think imposition actually takes this like smaller double barrel DeLacy bet sizing.
I don't think it really does it now. So top right, I decided to check that hand back because if I think about the playability of my hand here, like if I c-bet my hand here and I get raised, that's really bad for my hand because I would have to fold a lot of equity. But at the same time, if I check here, I get to see, yeah, I get to see a turn card, and there's a lot of good turns for me, and this hand becomes really easy to play. Um, and also, like if I bet this hand, I don't want to be barreling this hand too much. So I think considering that, I would rather take a more passive line here. Like the reason I wouldn't want to barrel on this type of turn card, I think is because like if I think about my range, like or about my hand versus a flop check call range, my 7 is live, I can hit my straight, maybe my 5 is live too. But then if I bet barrel this turn, I think my 5 and 7 are for sure dead against the call range. Like after I barrel this turn, his range becomes a lot stronger. Like it's going to be a lot of 9x, a lot of strong draws. So I think my equity becomes a lot worse with this hand. And whereas like my checking equity is pretty decent. So I don't want to turn a hand with good checking equity into a hand with not that great betting equity. Like I would rather barrel a complete trash hand here, like maybe like a queen two off. Because if you think about a queen two off, it its equity versus a flop check call range or turn check call range is quite similar. So I think that would be a better bluff here, even though this one might have more overall equity. Um, and we could potentially get check raised on the turn like this. So that would also have us waste our equity.